Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to the next in our series of presentations in conjunction with Colm Rooney, who's Country Manager with Shopper Intelligence. In this session, we're going to look at three specific topics. So in Colm's overall research, there's, correct me if I'm wrong, about 18 different metrics that you look at, Colm. And the first presentation you did, which was the State of the Nation, which people can get access to. We looked at the sort of the general overview of the market, but we're taking a deep dive into three specific metrics now today, which is Irishness, environment, and traceability, to see how they relate to specific categories and to the retailers. So without further ado, Colm, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks, Maria. So yeah, a bit of a deep dive, a little more, the first one was a lighter touch kind of across the board. This is a more detailed look at those three specific areas. Again, really quickly, just kind of who we are, what we do. This is looking at behavioral data, really. So we're the how and the why shoppers do what they do in store. It's not loyalty scanner panel data. So it's really asking shoppers about how they behave, what they do. For today, it's really about what's important to them, how satisfied they are on those three specific metrics: Irishness, traceability, and environment. And we'll be looking at where there are where those things are important or not, or satisfied or not on across categories. And we measure 127 categories in our program, so clearly we're not going to look at all 127. We've kind of picked the top 10s. So if you don't see our category there and you kind of wonder where does it rank on certain metrics, just give us a shout and we'll be more than happy to tell you. Again, it's a global program. We do this across 11 countries. We do about 750,000 interviews globally every year. Ireland is a small drop off that 750,000, admittedly, but it's a big program for a country the size of Ireland. So we're doing almost 25,000 shopper interviews a year. We're about to go back into field for our 2022 program. It might sound odd that we're still in 2021, we're starting that program, but our fieldwork runs from November to March every year, and the data goes live around April, May. So it will probably be around 28,000 respondents for next year's program, or the upcoming program. So four things to cover. We're just going to first of all take a look at, well, let's look at how important, generally speaking, is traceability, Irishness, and the environment to Irish shoppers in the context of all the other 18 metrics that we measure. And then we'll do a deep dive on each one. So looking at specifically what categories are really important, topic by topic. Okay. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned at the start. Well, this week's session is a little shorter than the last. So it'll probably be about 40 minutes or so, I would imagine. But as Maria said, keep the questions coming. Please do ask questions, and even if you want to ask a question directly, we can open up the mics, I think. But get them through on text, and we can look at them that way. So as Maria mentioned, we cover 18 metrics. So when we're interviewing shoppers about how they shop the category and what they like, what they don't like, and what's important, we ask them to evaluate the category on 18 things. Okay, so the category that they've bought on 18 things. So we have 4 price metrics: price, special offers, identified value, and fixed low price or everyday low price. So we have 4 price metrics that we say, how important are these price metrics and how satisfied are you with those things? We then have 8 product metrics that run from quality, freshness, premium, authenticity, healthy, environment, Irish, traceability. So again, we ask them, how important are all these things to you when you buy this category? Yes, high or low, and how satisfied are you? Innovation and range are our assortment metrics, and then we have 4 ease of shop metrics at the end: navigation, layout, out of stock or availability, and enjoyment. Do you enjoy shopping this category or not? Is that important or not? So there's 18 things that we ask. What we're really going to focus on today is these 3 here: the Irish, traceability, and innovation. But I think it's important to look at them in context of everything to see, well, in reality, how important are these things? So if we go back, we just used 3 years of trend to see how our priorities or expectations across these 18 areas changing over time. Okay, so if we look at 2019 to 2020 to 2021, the first thing that comes out is no shock, I think, is that the top 3 priorities for shoppers in Ireland, but also if we looked at this chart for any country that we do this in, it's the same 3. Where fresh is relevant, we want stuff to be fresh, we want quality, and we want an all at good price. You don't buy our data to be told that. That's pretty obvious stuff. But look how far ahead they are of everything. Like, they're the 3 things that are most important to shoppers, and they stay consistently the top 3 over the 3 years that we're going to show you today. So that's 19 to 20. And we can just look at, generally speaking, importance scores were going up, and the trend was that, importance scores were kind of creeping up year on year and year. Another way of putting it is kind of shopper expectations continue to rise. That was the whole point. And again, if we looked at this in other countries around the world, that was the same trend over kind of 17, 18, 19, 2020, is that most of these shopper priorities were increasing year on year. So shoppers were getting more expected, or more, they had more, their priorities were increasing year on year. Basically, the job for suppliers and retailers was getting harder because we were expecting more and more every year. But interestingly, what COVID brought was a general decline in importance levels. Sorry, I should say COVID. The last 12 or 18 months, which is not just COVID, it's Brexit and other things as well, obviously. But as you see there, we've just put in some figures to say, well, have they increased or decreased? Most things have decreased in terms of how important they are to Irish shoppers. And when it's a general decrease across the board, what that actually means in terms of our study, the way we interpret that is that expectation levels dropped, or I guess shoppers looked at this and said, well, I think the industry is doing a pretty good job in just keeping stock on the shelf a lot of the time and keeping us fed and under really difficult circumstances. So we got it. Either one way of putting it is they gave us a bit of a free pass or a bit of an easy ride a little bit for a year maybe, or expectation levels lowered a little bit because they thought people are doing well generally. But interestingly, the only one that increased, only marginally, but the only one that increased year on year in terms of this is now more important to me this year than it was last year, is Irishness of products. And I think that is something we see coming through a number of different studies that I've seen from other companies, was that, people were buying Irish more. There was a bit more kind of, and maybe it was a Brexit thing, or maybe it was just more availability, less availability of global products at times and more of Irish brands. There was a bit of a push towards buying Irish and buying more things Irish. So it's not a massive shift, but I think what's interesting is it's the only thing that sees an increase year on year is Irishness. So it's the only thing that became more important to Irish shoppers year on year. Everything else dropped back slightly when we measure it this way. Okay, but the point of showing you everything is just to put these three in context. Environment, Irish, and traceability are the things that we're going to focus on for the most part today. Okay, so we're going to deep dive into each of those. All right. So let's do that. Let's start with traceability. And again, we measure 127 categories in our study. So we're clearly not going to be able to look at, we're not going to just put a list of 127 categories on the page. We're just going to look at the top 10s. And so your category might land outside the top 10. It might be 11. It's not saying that it's not performing well or it's not important, but for today, for the purpose of this presentation, just for ease of presentation and to keep things moving along, we're just going to look at top 10s. Okay. So again, out of 127 categories, we ask shoppers for each of the 127 categories, we say, of those 18 metrics, when we get traceability, how important is traceability to you when you're buying this product? So the top 10 categories that shoppers say traceability is really important to me are these that are on the page. And again, I don't think it's any surprise or any shock to see that for the vast majority of them, they're meat-based products. And then if they're not meat-based, they're dairy. I think if that's the 10 that are on the page. I don't know where eggs technically falls in. Is it grocery or is it dairy? But let's for argument of this presentation, we say it's dairy. It's either meat or dairy, right? And it's all fresh pork, fresh beef, fresh lamb, butcher counter, which is more fresh meat, deli meat, fresh chicken, eggs, adult yogurts, rashers and sausages, and milk. Okay, so very. I would expect that they would be the categories most people would expect to see on a top 10 traceability list. So they're the categories where shoppers say traceability is most important to me. And we'll come back to those in a moment. The next top 10 is to say, well, what are the top 10 categories where I think the category is performing well on traceability, or I trust that I can trace this product back to its origin. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt there, Colm. I think there's a question there. Somebody's asked, are eggs new to this list? I think they're referring to the previous list you had.
Are they new? That's a good question. Are they new to the top 10? Do you know what I'll do? When I share this presentation back, I'll put something in there that kind of says if it's moved up or moved down or moved inside or outside the last year's position, just so you can see the trend. It's a very good question. And it's something I probably should have added in there. So I'll add that before I share. Off the top of my head, I don't have the answer.
Okay, thanks.
All right. But interestingly, when we look at eggs, it's not on the top 10 for satisfaction. Now, it could be 11 or 12 or 13, right? It might not be a million miles away. But this top 10 now is saying, right, that was what's most important. Where is traceability important? This is now where are shoppers actually most satisfied, or where they have confidence or trust in products that are traceable back to their origin or source. Okay, and again, it's a lot of meat categories. A lot of the dairy ones that we've seen already. Interestingly, something like milk alternatives is in there now. That wasn't one where that was in the top 10 in terms of how important traceability was, right? But the easiest way to compare those is to put them side by side. So again, on the right hand side, it was the top 10 where shoppers are satisfied, and the left hand side it's where they're important. And I've just put a kind of a thumbs up to say, well, if we're just looking at the top 10s, you can see that 5 of the top 10 that are important are also performing well: fresh pork, fresh beef, deli meat, fresh chicken, adult yogurts. But actually, when we look at the other ones that are not in the top 10 and just highlight against their own department average, if that makes sense. So if we compare eggs to dairy, if we compare lamb to meat, fish, and poultry, again, eggs is performing ahead. It's not in the top 10, but it's performing ahead of the dairy average. Milk is performing ahead of the dairy average. There's 3 that stand out that say, okay, there's a bit of misalignment here, because shoppers are saying traceability is important, but it's not. It's either just in line, it's average, or it's below average against its department, right? So fresh lamb is behind average with the MFP average for saying that they're satisfied with traceability. So what is it about? Again, I don't know the answer to this. If there's a fresh lamb supplier on the call, please feel free to jump in. Is that a fair evaluation? Is it a perception gap? Because a lot of this stuff is based on perception, right? We ask shoppers, are you happy or not? They may be genuinely satisfied because they've seen something in media, or there's been a campaign. Like we see a lot about fresh beef and traceability. But I can't say I remember fresh lamb. So maybe it's just a communication gap. Maybe we haven't reminded shoppers recently. Maybe there's not enough on pack or in store about Irish lamb or where it's traceable back to. But it's just interesting. And I know Russian sausages was one that was on the list last year. I don't know what position it was in, but it was on there last year. There is something about more processed meats where shoppers are a little more questioning where it's coming from and how it's done. But yeah, so there are 3 there where we would say there is a bit of a gap here. They are important. Traceability is important to our shoppers around lamb, butcher counter meat, and Russian sausages, but they have some question marks over its traceability. And you know, can they actually trace it back to source again? Okay. So that's point number 1. I think we have Phil, do we have a poll question on this one?
Yep, I'm going to pop it up there now.
Cool. So basically, we've looked at where our shoppers most satisfied category by category on traceability. But we can also roll up all those categories and look at the big 5 retailers and say, well, when we roll up all those categories, where are shoppers most satisfied with traceability? Who do we think has the best reputation around traceability, or the best perception of traceability? Again, these things don't always reflect reality. It's who's talking about it best, or maybe it does reflect reality. Maybe they genuinely are the retailer who does this the best. We'll just let some of those scores come through. You tell me when we're ready to go.
Just give it 1 more second.
Sure, no rush.
And there's.
I hope the question made sense. I think it did.
Yeah, I suppose we're just really asking, I suppose, if people just think off the top of their head and, you know, traceability, which retailer. So I'll end that. And I can share it on screen. You can see it there. So any thoughts there, Colm? Or do you want to pop up the results? But I think there's definitely an overwhelming view there that Super Value wins out in the minds of the shopper for traceability from the audience's point of view.
Okay, I just want to try. Can I clear this?
Stop sharing. Yep, there you go.
Oh, there you go. Sorry, I think I double-clicked the button that you clicked. Sorry, it's still on my side for some reason. I can't get rid of it. There we go. Okay, so let's look at those satisfaction scores and let's see if the audience lines up with the average Irish shopper. So we just put in the overall satisfaction scores that we covered last week at the top. But if we specifically look at traceability, yeah, Super Value get the number one satisfaction score on traceability, according to 25,000 Irish shoppers. So, and I think I saw Dunn's was number 2 on the ranking there, did I, on the poll? I can't remember, but they're at
the Dunn's would be second, yeah. And then split equal third place between Tesco and Aldi.
So yeah, so Super Value number 1, which matches what the audience thought. Aldi ranked number 2, interestingly. So there's something Aldi are doing quite well at the moment around, and they've increased the most year on year. Sorry, the obviously the rank is the number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 is the rank out of 5 out of the 5 retailers. And then I've just put in how their score has shifted year on year. So you can see there that Aldi have had a big increase there year on year. So, you know, there's something they're doing that is reassuring shoppers around traceability. But Super Value are the one who are winning out on that one. Okay. So that's traceability. Again, light touch on some of these. If we didn't cover your category, if your category didn't appear in the top 10s for either important satisfaction, feel free to give us a shout, and we can give you your scores on those metrics. The next one we're going to look at then is Irishness, and the two are closely linked, I would say. So again, if we look at the same format, what are the categories where shoppers say Irishness is most important to them, right? And again, we're seeing a fairly similar list in that it is dominated by dairy and by fresh meat categories. But then I would say there's always a couple of random things that jump in there. I don't know why this is there. Maybe we have a jam spreads supplier on the call. But that comes in there. So they're saying jams and spreads, importance of Irishness. I certainly, it's not the first thing that would jump to mind when I would think of that personally, but who am I to argue with 25,000 Irish shoppers? So that's one that jumps up. Wrapped bread as well. So sorry, that's specialty wrapped bread. So more kind of artisan bread and stuff, not just your regular kind of everyday bread. That's another one around Irishness. Again, that's a surprising one because maybe we would expect French style or Italian style breads when you think about specialty. But maybe we expect those styles, but we expect it to be Irish and manufactured in Irish. So again, they're the ones. So if you're any of those categories, shoppers are saying, talk to me about Irishness, prove to me your Irish credentials, tell me where this is from. You know, there's a bit of a story you can tell around these things. And a lot of these categories are obviously going to be doing it well, but maybe some are not. Okay.
It might have been, Colm, the big boom in sourdough last year during the pandemic.
Maybe so, yeah. It just brought everything to mind, yeah. And listen, sometimes it is those things. Sometimes it is something happens that brings a category top of mind. I don't know. It could well be something to do with that. They start thinking about, where's this coming from? Where's all the other, when I'm buying it in store, where is it actually coming from? Because I know the bread I'm making at home is Irish. So again, at the top 10 on satisfaction then, and we look at, again, a lot of meat categories, a lot of dairy categories, fish coming in there as well. Again, cheese is one that we haven't seen before. So Irish shoppers, and if you think about the names that are on, Colm, Dubliner, there's a lot of pre-packed everyday cheese that has very Irish names. So again, things like that will help, of course, in terms of reinforcing the Irish credentials of a category. Okay. So again, let's compare them side by side. Are the categories where Irishness is really important, are they matched up with the ones that are performing pretty well? Generally speaking, yeah, pretty good. There's 4 that are on the top 10 list for both. There's another 3 that are at least performing above average. But there's a couple of interesting ones. Fresh chicken is below average, so it's important. Irishness is important to Irish shoppers, but as a category, below the meat, fish, poultry average, which I think is an interesting one. Is it something to do with the dominance of private label? Are we just not talking about the Irishness of chicken enough? I know Manor Farm have launched a new kind of chicken sauce to Irish brand, given an Irish name, and it must be Irish chicken. So maybe things like that will help. But is it an over dominance of private label that we just don't talk about provenance and Irishness enough? Again, we see fresh lamb there, so traceability and Irishness are quite closely linked. Again, are we not talking about Irish lamb enough, or are there other countries that are supplying lambs that are on our shelves And maybe shoppers are picking up on that a little bit. I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert in that area. And we see specialty wrap bread again. We saw it previously. On traceability. We're seeing it again. It is below average on that one, right? So it is. It's performing below average on Irishness. So again, are we not doing enough? Even if it is French style or Italian style loaves, are they made in Ireland? Does that confuse the message? Are you, if you're a bread supplier supplying that category, are you okay with that score? Because it's like, well, I want to play up the French credentials rather than the Irish credentials, and maybe that's the case. But sometimes, sometimes knowing the current situation helps you figure out what you want to do in the future. So we do have some misalignment there again on Irishness.
There's a comment in there as well from Ruth Colm, but I think actually maybe popping up the satisfaction scores probably answers it. Is that based on the first column, the importance that butcher counter is down at 10, but yet beef and lamb, like beef are up at top. Well, beef anyway, beef and pork are 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And then it kind of seems to reverse in terms of satisfaction, that the butcher counter comes out top in satisfaction, yet is number 10 on the list.
But remember that this is just a top 10 list out of 127 categories. So I would say even appearing in the top 10 is a really good score, because there's 117 other categories that we're not showing, right? So if you're appearing in any way on both lists, I wouldn't worry too much about the order that you're in on 1 to 10, because the majority of categories aren't even being shown on this page. If you're in the top 10 for importance and satisfaction, I think it's safe to say it's pretty good alignment in general. Okay. And then again, let's look at the satisfaction scores by retailer. So again, we have the overall satisfaction that we covered a couple of weeks ago. We've already looked at traceability, and we look at the Irishness scores. This time we see Dunn's. Now there isn't much in it. Dunn's and Value are pretty close to each other on this one, and are ahead of the rest. But Dunn's right number 1, and they've seen the most improvement. So again, I don't know if they've done any specific campaign around this or anything like that, but because sometimes you will get it, you get a kind of a bump if you bring it to the top of shoppers' minds. But Super Value and Dunn's would have been, I think, 1 and 2 last year. They're 1 and 2 again this year, but they've switched positions. But there's been a good improvement there for Dunn's, and they are right number 1 on that. Okay, scores are close, but Dunn's get the number 1 score on the at a total store level, the kind of the Irishness of the range. Okay. So the third area then is looking at the environment or sustainability. Okay, and I think we have another poll that's coming up here, because we asked shoppers to say, right, you've said environment is important, or it's not, or you're satisfied or it's not. But what do you actually mean when you're buying this product or you're buying this category? What do you mean by sustainability? Because it can mean completely different things to completely different people. So we give them 6 options, and we say, when you talk about environment, do you mean recyclable packaging, less packaging, reduce waste, the manufacturing process that gets the product from source to the shelf, or the food miles that gets it from A to B, or the carbon footprint that's involved in the whole production of it, right? So they're the 6 options that we gave our shoppers. So we're going to give them to you as well, I think. We have a poll on this one?
Yeah, there you go.
So, and I guess answer this from your own perspective, like when you think about environment, or you think about what you could do for the environment, what do you mean? Or what do you, what's most important to your business? Sorry, not to you personally. Sorry if you've already voted and I misguided you.
Okay, good. They're flying in there. So yeah, again, which one is most important to your business? And it will, it depends on your business, your product, or which category you're playing in. So far, I'll reveal the results now in one moment, but it's fairly level.
Yeah, it's fairly split. Yeah.
Okay, I'll end that and share.
Okay, so carbon footprint is coming out. Carbon footprint is the main one there, right? And then reduce waste. So reduce waste could be reduce food waste or product waste, or things like that. But yeah, it's not using something that you bought. Okay, so this group says carbon footprint. Okay, so let's see what shoppers said. If we look again at the 25,000 or so responses that we got on this, shoppers, the one that comes out on top is actually recyclable packaging. So, and then the next one is manufacturing process. So I guess, and again, we've had this data for a while, and we've been talking to clients about this and about how to interpret I guess recyclable packaging was the number one of these 6. It was the number one last year. It's the number one again this year, and has even increased more so. I guess if you think about shoppers at home or consumers at home, what's the thing that they have most impact over of those 6? It's well, the one thing I can do is recycle properly, put the right stuff in the right bin, recycle things, clean the packaging before it goes in, all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's why, from a shopper or a consumer perspective, they say, well, when I talk about the environment, really I'm talking about recyclable packaging on average, when we take all categories into account. Less packaging has dropped down slightly, but I think it's interesting that manufacturing process has come up quite considerably. Maybe we are starting to shift now and say, well, it can't just be about me putting the right stuff in the right bin. There's actually a bit of a responsibility now on companies, but also on me as a shopper, to understand the manufacturing or sourcing or growing process that suppliers are using, and the impact that's having on the environment. So maybe it'll be interesting to see how these shift over time. We only started asking this question last year, so this is the 2nd year we've asked it. But we can see, it'll be interesting if the ones on the right hand side of the page start to come up more, because carbon footprint was the one that this group thought. So I would say that businesses maybe are thinking about carbon footprint and talking about being carbon neutral, but actually shoppers are talking more about recyclable packaging on average. So there's maybe a bit of a disconnect there, or we're coming at things from a different angle. But we asked this question obviously to everybody, and everybody bought different categories. So we could assign categories to each of these 6 things, because sustainability will mean different things to different categories. So if we look at the next page, if we look at the next page and break out the 127 categories into kind of top 5s for each of these, you can see quite clearly here that shoppers of squash and cordial and crisps and cracker breads, they kind of think, well, I want to be able to recycle the packaging. Whereas if we look over the the right hand side of the page, there are categories that rank really highly on carbon footprint being a top priority for them when they talk about sustainability of the environment. And there are a lot more non-food categories. Okay, vegetarian food is in there as well in terms of carbon footprint. So we don't have time to go through everything, but again, if there's questions about any specific one that's there, please do ask or follow up with me afterwards. But again, I think it's quite interesting to see that depending on the product I'm buying, sustainability or environment means something very different to me. And I guess the whole point of this is, without getting into each one by one, is to say, do you know which of these 6 things is most important to your shop, and how well are you performing on it? And are you talking about the right things? Like if you're talking about our packaging is recyclable, our packaging is recyclable, maybe your shoppers have moved on from that, and maybe that's a given. Maybe actually what they want to hear you talk about is carbon footprint or food miles or reduce waste or whatever it might be, right? So the point being, are you talking about the right things to your shoppers when it comes to environment? Broadly, but in this case, when we're talking about the environment. Okay. So there's loads more on that page. And again, we could rank 127 categories for each of those 6 things, but that'd be a horrific presentation to sit through. So we're just looking at top 5s. But again, if you want to see any information there, and listen, I don't have the answers to a lot of these things. Like I think rum is in there somewhere, or obviously rum come up. International whiskey is there for food miles. Maybe that makes sense. Like why are we shipping? I don't mean why, but what shoppers are thinking of that category are thinking, well, we're shipping a heavy product all the way from another country to here. So they're thinking about food miles. Like less packaging, there's a lot of fruit and veg categories in there. Why are we packaging fruit and veg when we maybe shoppers are telling us that they want to buy it loose? Pork, I don't know why pork is under food miles, but it is. So there's a reason for all these things. I just don't have all the answers today. But again, you dig into these things trying to figure out what's going on, what do our shoppers mean, and maybe if you're in those categories, those things make perfect sense.
Yeah, and I know there was a comment there from Ruth. Poor old lamb is definitely having a.
It's getting a bit of a hammering, isn't it?
I think we'll have to pass on a note to Board Bia that it's time to do a lamb.
Time to do a campaign, yeah, and remind us all that it is Irish lamb that we're buying in our stores. It is definitely taking a hammering. Okay, so again, let's go back to that format of what are the top 10 categories where shoppers think environment is most important, and then we'll look at satisfaction again. Sorry, this is a weird one because things like brandy and cognac started coming up, and honestly, I don't know why that's there. But brandy and cognac shoppers are clearly saying it's important. Again, maybe it's around shipping and coming from different parts of the world, and they're heavy products, and maybe they're thinking about their food miles and things like that. But I think there's a lot of non-food categories that are coming in here, like female facial care, feminine hygiene, face masks is a new category that we've got in this year. Vegetarian food, again, I think that's an interesting one, because they do definitely position themselves as sustainable, more environmentally friendly, but shoppers are very much saying, well, yeah, it's important to me when I'm buying this. You need to prove the credentials on this product, and milk alternatives in a kind of a very similar space. But so we see some different categories come up here that we've seen for traceability and Irishness. It's not just about the meat categories or the dairy categories. Okay, it's about non-food and some categories that kind of fit naturally in this space. So the other categories where the top 10 where shoppers say environment is most important to me. The list gets a bit wackier again when we look at the top 10 where shoppers are most satisfied. You're going to see the things like fish counter fish, a lot of fruit and a lot of veg. So shoppers clearly are kind of satisfied with a lot of those things that, depending on what they meant by sustainability or the environment, there is good alignment here. Flowers and plants is always one that baffles me. And I don't mean to slag off any horticulture people that we might have on the call, but flowers and plants was ranked, I think, 4 or 5 last year as well, for how satisfied shoppers were with the kind of the environment or sustainability credentials. And again, I don't mean to bash this category, because I often buy flowers for my wife, but it is, we're taking flowers out of the ground, wrapping them in plastic, flying them around the world, putting them in a store, and then bringing them home and then throwing them out a week later. Like that is very unsustainable. So how is it? So how are we so satisfied? And it just goes to show that often these things, it's not reality, it's perception. It's shoppers think this is very sustainable, or maybe something about having flowers in the home makes the home feel more environmentally friendly, and maybe we're putting it in the compost heap or a compost bin afterwards, and it is going back into the into recycling in some way. So maybe that's it. I don't know. I'm trying to understand that a little bit, because it's the second year that it's appeared in the top 10. But again, if we look at the what's important versus what's performing well, we see 4 are in the top 10s for both. There's 3 more that are performing pretty well. But then if we look at the 3 that are not performing pretty well, feminine hygiene, face masks, which again was a new category we started measuring this year, and vegetarian food. For me, at least, I kind of feel like vegetarian food is a really interesting one there, because that's a category that sells itself on sustainability and environment, and don't buy beef, buy vegetarian food. And again, not bashing one or the other, but clearly shoppers are saying, you need to tell me, it is important to me, you need to tell me that this is a sustainable product. But the satisfaction score is 14 points below the frozen department average. So maybe there are question marks. I remember a few pages ago we saw one of what they mean by sustainability in vegetarian food is actually carbon footprint. That's what they mean. So maybe the shoppers, even the shoppers who are buying this category, who are vegetarian or vegan and are buying this category, have question marks about its credentials, its environmentally friendly credentials. This data would suggest that is the case. Okay. Again, there's 117 other categories that we're not covering here, so we're sorry if we're not covering your category. Give us a shout if you want to see it. And the final metric I'm going to look at is looking at the satisfaction scores at a retail level. So when we roll up all those categories for SuperValu, for Aldi, for Dunnes, for Tesco, for Lidl, product by product, rolled up, get an average for the total store. We see SuperValu ranked number 1 again, Dunnes ranked number 3, Aldi 2, Dunnes 3, Tesco 4, Lidl 5. So, we've kind of seen SuperValu dominate some of these categories. Okay, not ranked number 1 in Irishness, but number 1 or number 2 on all 3 of these metrics that we're looking at. But what's interesting is, like 2 weeks ago, we talked about at an overall satisfaction level, SuperValu were ranked number 5 out of 5. It was mostly the price metrics that dragged them down on that. But there are clearly areas where they are best in class and where they are really driving shopper satisfaction, and where shoppers are recognizing that they are best in class in certain areas. And again, that's what shopper value is all about. It's like, okay, we have overall rankings, but when you get down into specific metrics or get down into specific categories, there are going to be things that are overperforming within one of the retailers, and there's going to be things that are underperforming. And that's really what this is all about, is identifying, if you take your category at SuperValu, Where are we performing well? Where are we not performing well? There's going to be opportunities for growth, or where is a retailer performing better or worse? Okay, so that's the whole point. Nobody is performing best in class on everything. Everyone has their strengths. Okay. Which leaves us with 3 takeaways.
Before you go pop into the takeaways, there's a couple of comments in from people, and we just might just pop, if you want to just pop back maybe just to the environment summary, because there's a comment there from Grania showing up, I suppose, that how complex the carbon footprint is for people to understand. And I suppose maybe, you know, consumer education is there's a time lag maybe between what businesses are actually working on and communicating about versus what I suppose consumers are hearing. So if historically the message has always been about packaging and recycling, maybe some of the messages around carbon footprint and using, you know, say wind generated electricity, things like that, you know, maybe those messages aren't coming out of the business circle into the consumer circle.
Or they are out there and we just don't understand them.
Yeah.
It could be that, because again, if you go back to when we gave the 6 options, I think carbon footprint was the lowest, or one of the lowest. Like I think a lot of that is around recyclable packaging is the highest, because it's the bit we understand the most, and it's the bit we have responsibility over. I don't think we really understand carbon footprint yet, properly. So I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And then there's a comment there about from Ruth in relation specifically into the fish, given the volume of fish that we actually need to import, as to how it performs in terms of the Irishness and I suppose the environment.
It seems incredible that we're an island and we have to import fish.
And then there's a question there from Rob. Is vegetarian food a catch-all for free from food, including vegan?
So it is, yes, it is vegan and vegetarian, chilled and frozen food. That's that's what that definition is. Yeah.
Okay.
We can split those out further, but that's what that definition is. Yeah.
Perfect. And actually, before we jump in, I might just have one more poll just on the environment trends. We wouldn't mind getting everybody's opinion. Like, okay, we've seen which ones you think are most important to your business, but which one do you think will going to win out next year? Which one's going to be in the headlines next year?
We'll put this poll up next year when I'm presenting with next year's results and see if we were right.
Was it right?
Yeah. So we'll keep this one on file. I'll print my screen and keep it.
Okay, it's a little bit more evenly split. Yeah. Flying in. Yeah, it's very okay, and then that, interestingly, I'm going to share this. The only one that grew, which is manufacturing process, is the only one that people don't think is going to top the trends next year.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So less packaging is still coming out in terms of the trend for next year.
Yeah,
it's kind of fairly even then between recycling and carbon. So that's interesting. I suppose literally 50% of people, it's coming back to, it's still all going to be about packaging next year.
Packaging, yeah. And I think it will be for shopper, for us, like normal people, it will be for a long time. I think definitely. Okay. So just a quick wrap up then, and probably nothing I haven't already said. So apologies if I'm repeating myself. But if we look at some of the takeaways, I guess the first point is, you know, listen, we saw freshness, quality, and price were the top 3 priorities. I don't see those changing anytime soon, no matter what happens. We still want fresh stuff, quality stuff at a good price. They're just the basics. So Irishness, traceability, and environment are not necessarily the top priorities, but they are in some categories. So overall, at an average level, or not, but they are. What are the areas that are most important to your shoppers? Like we always going to say, don't be a busy fool, or don't, spend your time on the things that are most important to your shoppers that are going to make the most difference. Do you know what's a priority for your shopper in your category, or for your brand, or for your retailer? Are you tracking them? Are you performing well on the right things? Because that's where you need to spend most of your time, arguably. Specifically, when we looked at Irishness traceability, there seems to be some kind of misalignment to I think it was Ruth said it, about fresh lambs getting a bit of a bashing on this presentation. It wasn't the intention, but there's clearly some kind of misalignment there. What's causing it? I don't know. I'm not an expert in fresh meat or fresh lamb. I can just tell you what the data says. Similarly, then, when we look at Irishness and traceability, there was some issues around bread and fresh chicken and rashers and sausages. Again, are they fair perceptions? Just like lamb, is that fair, or is that just some kind of communication gap that we just haven't reminded shoppers recently about how Irish they are, how traceable it is, or how do we address Is it a Board Bia campaign? You know, are they simply these kind of things? Have shoppers just forgotten? And then finally, clearly recycling is the thing that still stands out when shoppers talk about the environment. That's the thing we have most control over. It's the thing we can do as individuals. So maybe that's why it's coming out on top. But manufacturing process is the thing that increases most year on year. So are we starting to, do we want to get under the hood a little bit more? Do we want to actually see or understand how businesses are conducting their business and how they are producing products? And again, I guess the last point is the same as the other ones is, you know, what does sustainability and environment mean to your shoppers for your category or categories? Are you tracking it? Are you performing well on it? Because clearly we see it means different things to different categories. So you need to, either through our study or through some kind of research of your own, you know, understand what shoppers mean by by sustainability and measure it, and communicate to them what's most important to them, I guess. Okay. So that's it. That's Irishness, traceability and sustainability. Loads more data in there, obviously, but hopefully that was enough for today to give you a bit of a flavour of kind of what it's all about.
Colm, thank you so much. If anybody does want to pop another question into the chat or even unmute themselves, you're more than welcome. As I said, we will follow up in the next day or two with an email with a copy of the slides, a link to the recording. I'll CC Colm on that email, so if anybody has a question or wants to get in touch with Colm, please feel free to do so.
Great. Thanks, folks.